Denis Healey is someone who is regularly referred to, particularly amongst Labour supporters, as the best Prime Minister we never had, and who very nearly did on several occasions. In fact, in the 1980 Labour leadership election, if 5 votes had gone the other way, he would have become Labour leader in 1980, and then might have gone on to success politically. But of course, Denis Healey served under Harold Wilson as Defence Secretary, where he was a very strong member of the cabinet, even though he didn't hold a major portfolio. And then the initial plan, had Labour won the 1970 election, Harold Wilson was intending to make Denis Healey Chancellor of the Exchequer, although it didn't turn out well because the Conservatives won that election. Then, when Harold Wilson did eventually come back in 1974, he did make Healey Chancellor of the Exchequer, and he was then seen by a lot of people in the Labour Party as the successor to James Callaghan as leader. Whether Labour continued in government or not, a lot of people thought that, certainly by 1978-79, that within the next Parliament Callaghan would resign. So had Labour won in 78-79, that Callaghan would probably resign in 1982 when he was 70, and Healey would have become Prime Minister. In 1978, of course, famously, James Callaghan didn't call an election when, if he had have, he would have probably won, or if the Conservatives had won, it would be with a very small majority, and that then that lady wouldn't have become Prime Minister when she did, or probably wouldn't have become Prime Minister at all. Then, of course, there's the other option, which is what I think is the more likely option, is had just 5 or 6 MPs decided to vote a different way in 1980, and had Denis Healey become leader of the Labour Party then, he would have been able to, particularly like the Falklands, he was a former army major who would have been a lot more tactful in speaking and a lot more believable in speaking about military matters than, well, a lady who'd never been in the army, or a leader of the opposition who, although against fascism in the 1930s, was seen by many as a pacifist. But Denis Healey would have probably scored some points there, and in 1983 he would have certainly made a big dent in that Conservative majority, and I think pretty much certain he would have won the 1987 election, which would have brought Labour into office a decade before they actually did, which would have been significant because a whole generation of Labour MPs would have come into office when they didn't actually. For example, John Smith would have probably become Chancellor of the Exchequer. Neil Kinnock would probably also have prospered, might have made it Welsh Secretary or Education Secretary, as he actually shadowed, or Defence Secretary or Foreign Secretary, possibly, because he was a very good speaker, and that would have balanced things out with the left of the party. A Healey cabinet would have been very interesting, and might have been able to balance right-wing MPs, left-wing MPs, pro-European, anti-European MPs, to really bring things together, as opposed to, for example, the rather dull and lifeless Blair cabinet that didn't really have much diversity. A major issue with a Healey government starting in 1987 would be his age. He would have been 70 that's coming into office, or give or take a month or so, 70, and not the youngest Prime Minister we've ever had, one of the oldest, which would have certainly put forward a lot of possible contenders for the leadership, which of course, as I have suggested before, would have likely included Neil Kinnock and John Smith, both of course in real life did become leaders of the Labour Party, but never Prime Minister, and I think it would be very interesting. But there are other candidates for other videos. Another major issue that would have bothered a Healey government would have been Europe. This was the Maastricht Treaty in 1992, and the gradual enclosing of ties in the European Union throughout the 1990s. And of course the fall of the Berlin Wall would also have been significant, and it would have been certainly very beneficial to the Labour Party to be in office at the time the Berlin Wall fell, because it would have made it seem very, very flimsy, the kind of accusations that have flown at the Labour Party in the 1980s by really right-wing Conservatives who said that the Labour Party was advocating the same policies as the Communists in East Germany. It would have made any sorts of accusations like that seem stupid. And it would have been very beneficial for the Labour Party then. But of course Europe as well would have been really interesting, because the Labour Party, although it did, certainly in the 1970s, have, especially the left wing of the party, strong pro- and anti-European divisions within it. In the 1980s and 1990s, these mellowed into, became a really rather pro-European party as opposed to the Conservatives. Another key factor would be what would have happened if that lady had lost a 1987 election. There would have been a leadership election, which would have been quite interesting, and probably seen Michael Heseltine become leader. He would have been pro-European, his party would have been not so pro-European, and that would have been very beneficial, and Labour then would probably have been re-elected in 1992. Healey would have retired, one of his other people would have come in charge, and I think that 1987-1997 the Labour government would exist. Of course, though, but the ERM crisis and other things would have resulted in a two-term Labour government. In 1997, the Conservatives would probably get back in with someone like Michael Portillo.